Welcome back to the Sleepy Blocks channel. Today we will be experiencing a soft and cozy story about a witch and how her magic wasn't enough. This is the third episode of the series, The Tale of Every Creature, so if you like it, be sure to subscribe. But now, enjoy the story. Rain fell in heavy silver sheets the night everything changed. The village had always been small, tucked between dark pines and soft hills, where lanterns glowed like fireflies along crooked paths. This one among them had been gentle once, fingers stained green from gathering nettles and blue orchids, brewing quiet medicines in a corner hut that smelled of wet earth and honey. Villagers came at dusk with fevers, with cuts from scythes, with children too quiet in their cradles. A drop here, a sip there, and color returned to pale cheeks. No one called the brewer wicked then, only useful, only kind. But fear has a way of growing in the dark. Thunder rolled low and long that evening, the kind that presses against your ribs. The sky split open, lightning, sharp, pale, endless, found the square where the wanderer stood, trying to shelter a trembling lamb from the downpour. The bolt did not kill. It changed. Skin tightened and paled to the color of new birch bark. The nose stretched long and hooked like a root-seeking water. Eyes filled with a strange, swimming green light that never quite faded, even in daylight. When the storm passed, the villagers did not see their helper anymore. They saw only the pointed hat soaked through, the robe clinging like wet wings, the face that no longer matched memory. Shouts rose like startled birds. Torches appeared too quickly, their flames spitting in the puddles. "Witch," someone whispered, then someone else said it louder. Pitchforks glinted. Doors slammed. The lamb they had saved together now bleated in terror at the sight of its rescuer. No words could undo what the sky had done. The creature turned and ran, bare feet splashing through mud, heart hammering louder than the thunder that still grumbled in the distance. Branches clawed at the robe. Rain stung the new too sensitive skin. Behind, voices faded but never quite disappeared, carried on the wind like an old curse. Deeper and deeper the wanderer went, past the last wheat field, past the place where foxes forgot to be afraid, until the ground grew soft and treacherous. The swamp welcomed the outcast the way no village ever would, thick mist curling like a blanket, willows drooping low as if bowing, frogs singing slow, endless lullabies. There, on rotting stilts above black water, the creature built a crooked hut, boards salvaged from shipwrecks, roof patched with moss so thick it breathed. Inside, a single cauldron waited, cold and patient. Years passed like fog drifting over the surface. No one came. The loneliness grew roots. It wrapped around every rib, quiet and patient, heavier with each empty night. The witch, no longer anyone's helper, sat by the window sometimes, watching fireflies drift like lost lanterns, and wondered if kindness had always carried this price, or if the lightning had simply shown what was already true. Yet even now, in the deepest part of the dark, the hands still reached for glass bottles and dried herbs. Not to harm, never to harm, only to remember what it felt like to mend something broken, and perhaps, somewhere beneath layers of hurt too old to name, to hope that one day something small and trusting might find its way through the mist again. Moonlight slipped through cracks in the crooked shutters, like spilled milk, pale and thin. The hut breathed slowly around the wanderer. Timber creaked with the weight of damp moss. Water lapped soft beneath the stilts, a lullaby that never quite soothed. Inside, the only warmth came from the low red glow beneath the cauldron, embers the creature fed with careful handfuls of dried kelp and old fence posts scavenged from the edges of forgotten paths. Night after night, the shadowed one returned to this small circle of light. Glass bottles lined the shelves like sleeping fireflies, some stoppered with cork, some sealed with wax the color of dried blood. Labels long since peeled away, but the hands remembered, this one for strength, drawn from blaze rods that once burned in nether fortresses, that one for leaping borrowed from rabbits who still dreamed of open meadows. The wanderer moved between them without hurry, fingers tracing curves of familiar shapes, the way a blind person reads the face of someone long gone. Brewing had become ritual, almost prayer. A pinch of glowstone dust stirred into thick, awkward potion base. The liquid brightened, reluctant first, then sudden, like hope waking up after years asleep. Redstone dust next, ground fine between two flat stones. It sparked tiny crimson stars that danced across the surface before sinking. The brew hissed softly, as though telling secrets to itself. Netherwort, small, ugly roots pulled from soul sand gardens the creature had planted in secret corners of the swamp, gave the mixture its deep, living red. Every ingredient carried memory. This glow once cooled a baby's fever while its mother wept grateful tears in the village square. That swiftness once let an old farmer reach his barn before the first zombie groan of dusk. The healing splash, oh, the healing splash, had closed a gash on a child's knee so neatly the scar vanished by morning. The child had hugged the brewer's robe and called the name no one used anymore. Now the same hands poured the finished draft into a single vial and lifted it to the lips. It tasted of iron and rainwater and something faintly sweet, like honey left too long in the sun. Warmth spread through the chest, knitting small hurts the lightning had left behind, cracked ribs that still ached when the wind turned cold, skin too thin that split at the slightest brush. The body mended itself a little more each night, never completely, never enough to feel whole. The creature set the empty bottle down beside all the others. Rows of them stood on the windowsill like silent witnesses, some half full, some drained to the last shimmering drop. Each one proof that healing could be made again and again, yet the deepest wound stayed untouched. Not the scar on the skin, not the ache in old bones, the wound inside, the one carved by torches held too close, by doors slammed in the rain, by the word witch shouted until it became the only name left. The wanderer leaned against the rough table, forehead resting on folded arms. The cauldron bubbled on, patient and blind. Outside, a frog called once, twice, then fell quiet. In the stillness between one breath and the next, the creature whispered to the empty room, "I could stop." The words hung there, small and trembling, but the hands were already reaching for fresh netherwort, already measuring glowstone dust with the same careful pinch used for years. Because stopping would mean admitting the hurt had won, and somewhere beneath exhaustion and fog and years of silence, a stubborn, quiet part still believed that if enough potions were brewed, if enough small breaks were mended in the world, even if no one ever saw them, then perhaps one day the hands would finally learn how to mend their own maker too. The fire beneath the cauldron sighed, low and warm, as though it understood. The night stretched on, and the brewing continued. Mist hung thick that evening, turning the swamp into a world of soft gray shapes. The wanderer had stepped outside for the first time in weeks, only to the narrow platform of stilts, never farther. The air smelled of wet peat and night-blooming flowers that opened only when no one watched. A single lantern swayed from a crooked nail, its weak flame trembling like something afraid to be seen. Then came the sound. Heavy footsteps, slow and uneven, splashing through shallow water. Not the light patter of foxes or the slither of drowned things rising. Something bigger, something metal. An iron golem emerged from the fog. Its body was patchwork, plates dented from old fights, one arm hanging crooked, rivets weeping rust like slow tears. The creature had seen golems before, back in the village days. Tall guardians who stood silent beside doors, fists ready for anything that smelled of night. This one moved like it carried every wound it had ever taken. Perhaps it had strayed too far from its village, or perhaps its village no longer wanted it either. The wanderer froze on the platform. The golem lifted its heavy head. Eyes, simple carved slits, caught the lantern light and held it. No fear in them, only exhaustion. Something stirred in the shadowed one, old habit, the instinct to mend. Without a word, the creature slipped back inside, returned with a bottle of healing potion, clear liquid flecked with faint gold, the same recipe once used on farmers bitten by cave spiders. The hands shook only a little as they uncorked it. From the open window, the wanderer extended the vial toward the golem, palm up, offering. The golem paused. For one heartbeat, the swamp held its breath. Frogs fell silent. Even the water stopped lapping. Then the golem saw the pointed hat silhouetted against the lantern glow, saw the long nose, the green-tinted eyes floating in the dark like marsh lights. Recognition flickered through the iron frame, not understanding, only memory of warnings whispered in village squares. Stay away from the swamp witch, the one who twists life into something wrong. The golem recoiled. One massive step backward, metal groaned. Water surged around iron legs. The creature's arm dropped. The bottle slipped from cold fingers and shattered on the platform edge. Golden liquid hissed into the black water, useless now, swallowed by the mire. The golem turned. It did not run. Golems do not run, but it moved away with deliberate speed, shoulders hunched as though shielding something already broken. The fog closed behind it, like a curtain drawn against bad dreams. The wanderer stood motionless, hands still outstretched toward empty air. The lantern flame dipped low, almost died, then steadied again. Inside the chest, something tightened, old scar tissue pulling tighter still. Not surprise, not even anger, only the quiet confirmation that nothing had changed. The lightning had marked the creature forever, and the world still read that mark the same way. Danger, curse, other. The broken glass glittered at the wanderer's feet like fallen stars no one would wish on. Slowly, the creature knelt, gathered the largest shards with careful fingers, carried them inside, placed them beside the empty bottles on the shelf, not to keep, but to remember. Another vial would be brewed tomorrow, another offering prepared, but tonight the hands stayed empty. The cauldron fire burned lower. The swamp sighed around the hut, soft and indifferent, and in the quiet between one breath and the next, the loneliness grew one more quiet layer. thicker now, heavier, like moss settling over stone that no rain could ever wash clean again. Rain returned that night, heavier than memory. It drummed steady on the moss roof, 1,000 small fingers tapping the same patient question. Inside the hut, the cauldron fire had burned low, only embers now, breathing faint orange through the grate. The wanderer sat motionless by the window, knees drawn close, long robe pooling around bare feet like spilled ink. The empty bottle from the golem still lay on the sill, its broken neck catching the last of the dying light. Then came the sound, not the heavy splash of iron, not the slither of drowned things. Something lighter, hesitant, human, tiny footsteps in the mud outside, slipping, catching, slipping again. A small body fighting the suck of the swamp, breath coming in quick, wet gasps. The footsteps reached the base of the stilts and stopped. A moment of silence broken only by rain and the child's shivering cough. A weak knock followed, 3 soft taps against the lowest board. Then nothing. The creature did not move at first. Old instincts rose like cold water. Hide deeper, douse the light, let the night swallow whoever stood there. The pointed hat cast a long shadow across the floor. The green eyes reflected nothing back. Years of slammed doors echoed in the chest, doors that once opened for this same small sound before lightning changed everything. Another knock, weaker, followed by a small broken sob that cut straight through the rain. The wanderer rose slowly, robe whispering against the floorboards. Fingers brushed the cauldron's warm rim as though asking permission. The fire answered with a soft pop, sending one spark upward, like a question mark. Through the crack between door and frame, the creature saw a child, no more than 6 winters old. Clothes soaked dark, hair plastered to a pale face. One small hand clutched a torn blanket, the other pressed against the wood for balance. Fever-bright eyes looked up, not at the shadow behind the door, but at the faint glow leaking from inside. Hopeful, desperate, lost. The child's lips moved, voice so small it almost drowned in the downpour. Please, I can't find them. It hurts. The wanderer's hand tightened on the doorframe until wood creaked. Every scar inside pulled tight. This was danger dressed as innocence. This was the village again. Small faces that would one day hold torches. Small voices that would one day shout the word no one wanted to hear anymore. And yet, the child swayed. Knees buckled. The blanket slipped into the mud. Something in the creature cracked open. Just a hairline fracture, but enough. Not trust, not yet. Only the oldest habit of all, to ease pain when it stood shivering at the threshold. The wanderer did not open the door wide, only enough to slide one slender arm through the gap. In the palm rested a small glass bottle, weak regeneration, the gentlest brew the shelves held. Clear liquid inside, flecked with the faintest rose from beetroot, harvested under moonlight. Enough to cool fever, enough to quiet the ache. Not enough to change what the child would see when the lightning-scarred face finally stepped into view. The bottle hovered just beyond the child's reach. The small hand lifted, trembling fingers closed around cool glass. The child looked up again, eyes wide, not with fear, but with something softer, something that remembered kindness before it learned suspicion. A whisper drifted up through the rain. "Thank you." The child uncorked the bottle with clumsy fingers, drank in small sips, then pressed the empty vial to a wet cheek like a secret kept. Slowly, carefully, the small body curled against the doorframe, back to the wood, knees tucked close, blanket pulled over shoulders. Breath evened, shivers eased. Sleep came fast, the way it does for children who have run too long. The wanderer stayed there, arms still extended through the crack, watching the rise and fall of that narrow chest. Rain kept falling. The lantern inside flickered once, twice, as though trying to decide whether to stay awake. For the first time in years, the creature did not retreat deeper into shadow. It simply stayed, listening to the soft rhythm of rain and breath and something else, something small and alive and unafraid, sleeping against the door of the one the world had named Monster. The loneliness did not leave, but for one heartbeat in the space between two raindrops, it felt a little less heavy. Dawn arrived soft and uncertain, the way light sometimes hesitates before entering a room full of shadows. Rain had slowed to a fine mist that hung in the air like forgotten breath. The swamp exhaled slowly, frogs resuming their low, sleepy chorus, water dripping from willow tips in patient silver beads. Inside the crooked hut, the wanderer had not slept. The creature remained near the door, back pressed to the rough wood, listening to the small, even rhythm of breathing just beyond the threshold. The child still lay curled there on the narrow porch platform, blanket damp but no longer shivering. Fever had retreated, and cheeks held a faint flush of returning warmth. The empty regeneration bottle rested beside one small open hand, fingers loosely curled around it as though it were a talisman carried through dreams. The witch watched through the narrow crack between door and frame, never opening it wider, never stepping fully into the gray morning light. Old fear still coiled tight in the chest. What if the child woke and saw the face clearly? What if those trusting eyes, filled with the same recognition the iron golem had carried, the quick recoil, the backward step, the word that always followed? At least yet the small chest rose and fell, steady, safe. Something fragile stirred in the creature then, not trust, not hope, but the ghost of an older instinct, the need to protect what was already mending, even if from a distance. The wanderer slipped back to the shelves. Fingers moved with practiced quiet among the bottles. Another draft, this one even gentler. A splash potion of healing, thinned with water from the clearest part of the swamp, laced with a single petal of allium, whose faint purple gave the liquid the softest lavender glow. Not strong enough to change the world, just enough to keep the quiet healing alive a little longer. The creature approached the door again. This time the hand did not reach through the crack with a bottle to offer. Instead, it hovered palm down above the sleeping child. The splash potion rested in the curve of long fingers. A single breath, slow, trembling, and the wrist flicked in the gentlest arc. The potion burst in a delicate shimmer of rose gold particles. They drifted down like snow made of starlight, settling over the small blanket, over damp hair, over the pale curve of cheek. The mist of healing sank into fabric and skin without a sound. The child sighed once in sleep, a sound so small it might have been only the wind shifting through reeds. The wanderer withdrew the hand quickly, as though the air itself might burn. Door eased almost shut. Only the thinnest line of light remained. Minutes passed, perhaps hours. Time in the swamp moved differently, thick and slow, like honey poured over moss. The child stirred at last. Small fists rubbed at eyes. A yawn stretched wide enough to show missing front teeth. The blanket slipped from narrow shoulders as the child sat up, blinking into the pale morning. Confusion flickered across the face, where the cart had overturned, where the parents' voices had faded into panic, where fever had pulled everything into dark water. Then memory returned in pieces. The knock, the shadow behind the door, the cool glass bottle pressed into a fever-hot palm. The taste, sweet and strange and kind. The child looked around. No one stood on the platform. No footsteps led away through the mud. Only the empty bottle beside the blanket, and now this faint shimmer still clinging to the air like dew that refused to fall. A small hand reached up. Fingers brushed the last drifting particles. They sparkled once against the skin, then vanished. The child whispered to the empty porch, to the closed door, to the mist, to whatever watched from inside. "Thank you, again." No answer came, but the creature hidden in shadow felt the words settle somewhere deep, warm, quiet, unexpected, like the first sip of a potion brewed just for the heart. The child stood slowly, folded the damp blanket over one arm, looked once more at the crooked hut, so strange, so crooked, yet somehow safe, then turned toward the faint path that wound back through the willows, small feet, leaving shallow prints in the softening mud. The wanderer stayed by the crack until those prints faded into mist. Only then did the long fingers finally close the door all the way. The hut fell quiet again, but something had shifted inside it, small as a single petal falling into a cauldron, yet enough to change the color of everything that would come after. The loneliness remained, yet now it carried, tucked somewhere beneath the ache, the memory of a child's whisper. And for the first time in years, the silence did not feel quite so complete. Morning light filtered through the swamp in pale, watery ribbons, soft gold that never quite reached the black water below. The wanderer had spent the hours since the child left standing motionless by the window, robe still damp from leaning too close to the open crack, hands folded tight against the sill until the knuckles paled even whiter than the rest of the skin. The empty regeneration bottle from last night sat beside the broken shards from the golem, small relics of offerings refused and accepted in the same breath. Then the footsteps returned, not fleeing this time, not lost, deliberate, small boots squelching through mud with the careful rhythm of someone who had decided to come back. The creature's breath caught. Through the mist, a narrow shape appeared, same soaked cloak, same blanket now tied like a cape around thin shoulders. The child stopped at the base of the stilts, looked up toward the crooked hut. No knock this time, only a small hand lifting something into view, a flower crown, woven from white oxeye daisies and the tiny purple alliums that grew in hidden patches near the water's edge. Flowers the wanderer had gathered by moonlight for years, never dreaming anyone would notice them. The stems were braided unevenly, petals already beginning to wilt from being carried so far through rain and reeds. Yet the colors glowed against the gray morning like a promise no one had asked for. The child placed the crown carefully on the lowest step of the rickety ladder, one that led nowhere near the door, but close enough to be seen, then stepped back, looked up again, spoke to the shuttered window, to the shadow behind it. "I made this for you because you helped me, even when you didn't have to." The voice trembled only a little, brave in the way only very small things can be brave. No answer came from inside. The child waited. Raindrops slid from willow leaves and fell between them like slow tears. Then, with one last glance at the silent hut, the small figure turned and walked away again, footprints filling slowly with water, disappearing one by one into the mist. The wanderer did not move until the last echo of footsteps had dissolved. Only then did long fingers reach through the crack in the door, cautious, trembling. They lifted the flower crown as though it might crumble at the slightest pressure. Petals brushed cold skin. The scent rose faint and clean. Earth, morning, something alive that had chosen to grow here anyway. The creature carried it inside, set it on the rough table beside the cauldron. Light from the single window caught the white daisies and made them shine like tiny moons. For a long moment, the wanderer simply stared, green eyes wide, unblinking. Something warm bloomed beneath the layers of scar tissue in the chest. Not big, not loud, just a quiet unfurling, like the first netherwort sprout pushing through soul sand after months of patient darkness. It hurt a little, this warmth. Old places long frozen began to thaw, and thawing always stings. The creature reached for a small clay bowl, usually used for grinding blaze powder, filled it with clear swamp water, gently lowered the flower crown inside so the petals floated, suspended, still beautiful even as they began to soften, not to preserve them forever, only to keep the moment a little longer. The cauldron bubbled softly behind, its fire low and steady. Outside, a single frog called, a slow, lonely note that somehow sounded less empty than before. The wanderer sat beside the bowl, watched the flowers drift, felt a strange new ache of being seen, not as monster, not as curse, but simply as the one who had offered a bottle through the dark. For the first time since the lightning, the loneliness wore a tiny crack, and through that crack slipped the softest possible light. Someone had come back. Someone had left a gift. And someone, small, trusting, impossibly kind, had remembered the shadowed one with flowers instead of fear. Night fell gentle that time, wrapping the swamp in velvet dark. The wanderer had kept the flower crown floating in its clay bowl for 3 sunsets now. Petals still held their shape, though edges curled inward like secrets, folding closed. Each evening, the creature carried the bowl closer to the single lantern, watching how light played across white daisies and faint purple alliums, colors that had no right to feel so warm in this place of endless gray. Then came the footsteps again, not hesitant, not fleeing, steady, purposeful, small boots finding the same path through reeds and mud as though it had already been walked 100 times in dreams. The child appeared at the edge of the platform just as the first stars pierced the mist above. No blanket this time, no fever-flushed cheeks, only wide eyes reflecting lantern glow and a small, determined mouth set in a line that spoke of questions carried too long. The child stopped at the lowest step, looked up toward the crooked door, still closed, still cracked just enough for a shadow to watch from within. No knock. Instead, a soft voice lifted through the damp air. I came back because I wanted to ask things about the stars and why your potions glow like that and why you hide. The words hung there, simple and bare, no fear in them, only curiosity wearing the shape of trust. Inside the hut, the wanderer felt the old coil of panic rise, sharp, familiar. The pointed hat cast its long shadow across the floorboards. The green eyes caught nothing but their own reflection in a nearby bottle. Every instinct whispered retreat, slide deeper into darkness, let silence answer for everything, keep the wound safe behind wood and mist. But the flower crown sat on the table like a quiet witness, petals still floating, still chosen. The creature moved, not to the door, but to the narrow window beside it. Long fingers eased one shutter, opened the smallest distance, enough for a voice to pass through, enough for moonlight to touch pale skin without fully revealing the face beneath the wide brim. The wanderer spoke for the first time since the lightning changed everything. Voice low, hoarse from years of disuse, soft as moss underfoot. Stars, they were here before villages, before potions, before fear. They don't ask questions, they simply shine. A pause. The child tilted head, listening. And the glow. The creature continued, slower now. It comes from glowstone, dust carried from places deeper than caves, brighter than day. When you mix it with water and netherwort, something wakes up, a little light that refuses to stay hidden. The child stepped closer to the stilts, not afraid, only curious. One small hand rested on the lowest railing. Why do you stay out here, all alone? The question landed like rain on still water, ripples spreading slow and deep. The wanderer leaned nearer the shutter crack. Green eyes found the child's face in the dark, open, waiting, unafraid. Because once, people looked at this face and saw only storm, only curse. They forgot the hands that once held their children through fever nights. They forgot the name they used to call in thanks. Silence stretched between them, not heavy, only honest. Then the child spoke again, voice smaller but steady. I don't see a curse. I see someone who gave me medicine when I was shaking. Someone who didn't have to. The wanderer's fingers tightened on the shutter edge. Something inside cracked wider, not pain this time, but release. A breath held for years slipped free. Stories are easier to tell through a door, the creature whispered. But questions deserve faces. The child smiled, small, gap-toothed, impossibly bright in the lantern light. Then tell me more about the herbs, about the lightning, about whatever you want. The wanderer hesitated only a heartbeat. Then, through the narrow opening, words began to flow, quiet tales of redstone that sparks life into stillness, of blaze rods that burn without end in fortresses no sun can reach, of allium petals that hold faint echoes of forgotten meadows. The child listened, asked more, laughed once, a sound so light it startled frogs into sudden quiet. And for the first time since the storm, the hut did not feel quite so empty. The lantern flame steadied, the flower crown floated on. The night listened. A bridge, fragile, made of whispers and moonlight, was being built, one question at a time. Twilight bled slow across the swamp that evening, turning water to molten lead and willow branches to long black fingers. The wanderer had grown used to the small voice, drifting up through the mist each few nights. Questions about redstone sparks, about why blaze powder never quite cools, about the way lightning sometimes lingers in the air long after the storm has passed. Answers came in whispers through the cracked shutter, careful and quiet, like sharing secrets with the dark itself. The child listened, always listened, and sometimes laughed, a sound so light it made the frogs pause mid-call. But tonight the air felt heavier. torchlight flickered far off at the swamp's edge, orange pinpricks moving in a slow, searching line. Voices carried on the damp wind, muffled but unmistakable, names called in worry, boots splashing through shallow channels, and the occasional sharp bark of a dog. The villagers had come looking, not with pitchforks this time, not yet. Only lanterns and tired faces, and one small name shouted again and again into the growing dark. The child had been gone from home too long. Inside the crooked hut, the creature felt the old panic rise like cold water through cracked stone, every scar pulled tight. The pointed hat cast its shadow longer across the floorboards. Green eyes darted to the window, to the flower crown still floating in its bowl, petals now soft and translucent, clinging to memory more than life. This was how it always ended. Someone kind, someone small, someone who forgot for a moment what the world said about the one who lived here. Then the torches came, then the shouts, then the word that erased every gentle thing that had come before. The wanderer moved without sound to the shelves. Fingers closed around a bottle of swiftness. Clear liquid swirled with faint silver motes, the kind once brewed to help farmers outrun creeping night. Enough to carry this body deep into the mire where no lantern could follow. Enough to vanish again, as it had vanished before. The child's voice rose suddenly from the platform below, small, urgent, cutting through the approaching lights. "Don't go." The words landed soft, but sure, like a pebble dropped into still water. The creature froze, hands still on the bottle. Through the shutter crack, the small figure stood on the lowest step, back straight, blanket tied around shoulders like armor. Eyes lifted toward the shadowed window, not pleading, only steady. "I know they're looking for me, but I'm not scared. I told them I got lost. I didn't tell them about you." The torchlight drew closer, perhaps 24 paces now. Voices sharper. A dog barked once, low and uncertain. The wanderer's fingers tightened around the swiftness potion until glass creaked. Every instinct screamed retreat. Drink, run, disappear into fog and reeds and silence. Leave this fragile bridge unburned. Keep the wound safe. Keep the loneliness familiar. But the child stayed. Did not run toward the lights. Did not call out for help. Only waited. Small hands loose at sides. Face turned up toward the crooked hut, as though it were the safest place in all the world. Something inside the creature twisted. Not fear this time, but the sharp ache of being chosen, of mattering enough that someone would stand between torches and shadow. The bottle slipped from cold fingers, rolled across the floorboards, stopped against the table leg with a quiet clink. The wanderer stepped back from the window, not toward the deeper dark of the hut, not toward escape, toward the door. Long fingers rested on the latch, trembling, hesitant, but there. For the first time since lightning rewrote skin and memory, the creature did not reach for flight. It reached for stillness. Outside, the child whispered again, so soft only the wind and the one inside could hear. "Please stay." The torches moved closer still, but the door remained closed. And in that small, trembling space between latch and frame, the wanderer chose, for one fragile heartbeat, to believe that perhaps not every light carried harm. The loneliness pressed close. Yet now it stood beside something warmer, something that refused to let go. Torchlight danced closer through the reeds, painting long orange tongues across black water. The voices sharpened, names called with growing edge, lanterns swinging like restless stars. A dog barked again, closer this time, its sound cutting clean through mist. The child stood rooted on the lowest step of the crooked ladder, small frame silhouetted against the approaching glow. Blanket cape fluttered once in the damp breeze. Eyes never left the shadowed window above. Inside the hut, the wanderer felt the world narrow to a single heartbeat. The swiftness potion lay forgotten on the floorboards where it had rolled, glass cool against wood. Escape still waited there. Drink, leap from the back platform, vanish into channels no human foot could follow. The swamp would hide this body again, the way it always had, safe, silent, alone. But the child had said please, not begged, not cried, simply asked, with the same quiet certainty used to ask about glowing potions and distant stars. And now that small voice rose once more, trembling only at the edges. Don't go, please. I'm not afraid of them finding me here, because you're here. The words landed soft as falling petals. They settled into every old scar, every place fear had carved deep grooves. The creature's long fingers hovered over the latch, still trembling, still uncertain. Green eyes stared at the narrow crack of door, at the sliver of night beyond where torchlight now bled red against the mist. Memories surged like fever dreams, villagers turning away after the lightning, the iron golem recoiling from an offered hand, doors slamming in rain-soaked squares. Every time the wanderer had reached, the world had pulled back. Every time kindness had been offered, it had been red as poison. Yet here stood one small soul who had drunk the potion and come back with flowers, who had listened to whispers through shutters and asked for more, who now chose to stand between the lights and the shadow refusing to run. The torches were close enough now to throw flickering shapes across the hut's crooked walls. A man's voice called the child's name, worried, sharp, edged with the same fear that once lit pitchforks. The wanderer's hand tightened on the latch, then loosened, then fell away. No swiftness, no flight into deeper dark. Instead, the creature stepped back, one slow step, then another, until shoulders pressed against the rough table. The flower crown floated in its bowl nearby, petals soft and fading, yet still glowing faintly in lantern light. A quiet witness, a quiet promise kept. The child looked up again, saw the shadow retreat from the door crack. For one terrible heartbeat, the small face crumpled, fear flashing bright and raw. But the wanderer did not vanish. Long fingers reached instead for the single lantern hanging by the window, lifted it carefully, carried it to the narrow opening, held it high so its warm circle of light spilled downward, across the platform, across the child's upturned face, across the reeds where searching boots now paused, not to reveal the scarred face beneath the wide brim, not to invite torches closer, only to say, without a word, I am still here. The child's eyes widened, then softened. A tiny nod passed between them, secret, steady, unbreakable. Below, the searching voices hesitated. Lanterns swung uncertainly. Someone murmured something low. The dog whined, confused. Footsteps slowed, turned, began to drift away again, following false trails deeper into mist. The child stayed, did not run to the retreating lights, only waited until the last orange flicker had faded into gray, then whispered up through the damp air, You stayed. The wanderer set the lantern down, let the light pool soft across floorboards, felt something shift inside, old roots of fear loosening, not gone, but no longer the only thing holding the heart in place. For the first time since lightning rewrote everything, the creature chose not to disappear, chose instead to remain seen, even if only by one small pair of eyes that refused to look away. Moonlight pooled silver on the crooked floorboards the night the door finally opened, not wide, not all the way, just enough for a slender shadow to step aside and let one small figure cross the threshold, blanket still tied like a cape, eyes wide with quiet wonder instead of fear. The child paused just inside, boots dripping swamp water onto moss-soft planks, breathing slow as though afraid to break the hush that had lived here so long. The wanderer stood near the cauldron, robe sleeves rolled to pale elbows, hands already moving, gentle, deliberate, over the familiar shelves. No retreat into deeper shadow this time, no shutter crack between them, only lantern glow and the soft bubble of potion base warming over low embers. The child looked up, whispered, "Can I watch?" The creature hesitated only a breath, then nodded once, small motion beneath the wide brim. Long fingers lifted a small stool carved from driftwood and set it near the cauldron's rim. The child climbed up without hurry, knees tucked close, chin resting on folded arms so eyes could follow every careful movement. The wanderer began. A glass bottle first, awkward potion base, clear as morning dew. Into it went netherwort, those small, knobby roots pulled from soul sand patches the creature had tended in secret corners of the mire. "They grow where nothing else will," the voice murmured, low and rough from disuse, yet steady now. "They hold strength older than villages, older than storms." The liquid turned deep, living red. Next came redstone dust, ground fine between two flat stones until it shimmered like captured sparks. The child's eyes followed the crimson trail as it sank into the brew. Tiny stars flared across the surface, danced, then settled. Redstone, it remembers motion. It wakes things that sleep. A pinch here, and the potion learns to leap, to run, to heal faster than breath. The child reached out, hesitant, then stopped, looked to the shadowed face for permission. The wanderer paused, then slowly turned one long palm upward, placed a small measure of redstone dust into the waiting hand. The child's fingers closed around it, careful, reverent, then sprinkled it into the cauldron exactly as shown. The brew hissed softly, pleased, sending up a curl of warm mist that smelled faintly of iron and distant thunder. A gift passed between them then, not words, not flowers, but knowledge. The oldest kind, the kind that says, "I trust you with what matters most to me." The creature spoke again, quieter still. "Once, I brewed these for people who smiled when they took them. They called me by a name softer than witch. Then the lightning came, and the smiles turned to torches." The child listened without interrupting, small hand still resting near the cauldron's warmth. "But you stayed," the wanderer continued, "even knowing what they call this place, what they call me." The child looked up, eyes bright in lantern light. "I stayed because you didn't turn away when I was scared and cold. You could have, but you didn't." Silence wrapped them both, cozy, unbroken except for the cauldron's gentle bubble. Then the child smiled, gap-toothed, impossibly soft. "Teach me one more?" The wanderer reached for a single petal of allium, purple as twilight, fragile as trust, crushed it between fingertips. let the faint scent rise between them. This one holds memory of meadows no one sees anymore. At it last, and the potion remembers gentleness. Together they watch the petal sink. The brew brightened, rose gold now, warm as dawn that had not yet come. The child laughed once, quiet, delighted, at the way light caught the surface. The wanderer felt something loosen inside, old knots of fear untying threads by thread. Not gone, never gone entirely, but no longer the only story being told. Outside, wind moved through reeds like a long exhale. Inside, two shadows leaned close over one small cauldron, teacher and student, outcast and child, loneliness and light, brewing something stronger than any potion, the beginning of belonging. Darkness thickened until even the stars seemed to hold their breath. The swamp had grown unnaturally still, no frog songs, no wind sighing through reeds, only the low, distant thump of raid horns rolling across black water like warning drums. The wanderer felt it first in the marrow, something hungry approaching, something that carried iron and crossbows and the sharp stink of gunpowder. Illagers, pillagers, gray-skinned, banner-bearing, eyes gleaming with the cold joy of taking what was not theirs. They had drifted into the mire before, looting sunken boats, burning willow thickets for sport. But tonight their path cut straight toward the crooked hut on stilts. Lanterns swung from belt hooks. Arrows rattled in quivers. One carried a banner of black and red, fluttering like spilled blood against the night. Inside, the child slept curled near the cauldron's dying embers, small chest rising slow, blanket tucked beneath chin, flower crown now pressed between two pages of an old, water-stained book the wanderer had once used to press herbs. The small face looked peaceful, trusting, safe. The creature stood at the open door, wide open for the first time, robe whispering in the sudden draft. Long fingers gripped the frame until wood groaned. Green eyes scanned the dark. Torchlight flickered closer, throwing jagged shadows across the platform. Voices carried low and cruel, words about loot, about a strange hut worth burning, about anything that moved in the swamp belonging to no one. The child stirred, eyes fluttered open, saw the tall shadow framed in moonlight, saw the fear carved deep into pale features. What's happening? The wanderer turned only halfway, voice barely above breath. Raiders, they've come for what little there is here. The child sat up fast. Blanket fell away. Small hands clutched the edge of the stool. They'll hurt you. A pause. The horns sounded again, closer now. Boots splashed through shallow water. Crossbows clicked as bolts were knocked. The creature looked down at the child, really looked, at the gap-toothed smile that had returned night after night, at the tiny hands that had once sprinkled redstone dust with such care, at the flower crown still floating in its bowl, petals soft and fading, yet stubbornly beautiful. Something fierce and unfamiliar rose in the chest. Not anger, not rage, but a quiet, burning refusal. No more running, no more hiding behind shutters and silence. This small life had chosen to stay, had chosen to see. The wanderer stepped fully onto the platform, robe billowing like dark wings. The pointed hat cast its long shadow across the water below. The pillagers emerged from mist, 5 of them, crossbows raised, eyes narrowing at the figure standing alone in lantern glow. One laughed low, cruel. Another lifted his weapon, taking aim. The child cried out, small, sharp, terrified. The creature raised both hands, not in surrender, but in offering. From the shelves behind, carried in trembling arms, came every vial the hut held, regeneration glowing rose gold, healing clear as starlight, swiftness swirled with silver, strength ye brewed from blaze rods that once burned in fortresses no sun could touch. Bottles clinked softly against one another like fragile bells. The wanderer spoke, voice low, steady, carrying over water and wind. Leave this place. There is nothing here worth your fire. The lead pillager sneered, stepped forward, arrow drawn. The child scrambled to the doorway, small body shaking, yet refusing to hide. Don't hurt them. The creature moved then, fast, protective, placing the child gently behind the robe's hem. One long arm extended, shielding. The other lifted the first bottle high, not to throw in harm, not to curse, to pour. The cork popped free. Golden regeneration splashed outward in a wide arc, over the platform, over the child's hair, over the crooked walls of the hut. Particles shimmered like falling dew, sinking into wood and skin. The pillagers hesitated, surprised, uncertain. Another bottle, healing this time, clear liquid bursting into soft light that drifted across the water, touching even the raiders' boots. Swiftness followed, silver motes swirling, slowing their steps without force. Strength last, deep crimson that glowed warm against the dark. Not weapons, not destruction, only healing, only mercy. Poured out until bottles ran empty, until the wanderer's hands shook from the giving. The pillagers faltered. One lowered his crossbow. Another muttered something low. Confusion, perhaps unease. The banner-bearer stared at the shimmering particles clinging to his armor, at the child peeking from behind the tall shadow, at the figure who stood unarmed yet unafraid. For one long heartbeat the night held still. Then the lead pillager spat into the water, turned, motioned with a sharp gesture. The others followed, boots retreating through reeds, horns falling silent, torchlight fading into mist once more. The child exhaled, a trembling, relieved sound. The wanderer sank slowly to the platform boards. Empty bottles clattered around cold feet, strength gone, hands empty. Yet the hut still stood. The child still breathed. The flower crown still floated inside, untouched by flame. Dawn waited somewhere beyond the horizon, soft, patient, pale, and in the quiet that followed, the creature felt the deepest wound begin, ever so slightly, to close. Dawn arrived like a sigh the world had been holding too long. The platform boards still smoked in thin gray wisps, where healing had met fire and refused to let it win. Empty bottles lay scattered like fallen stars, some cracked, some whole, all drained to the last shimmering drop. The crooked hut stood crooked still, walls blackened in places, thatch singed at the edges, yet upright, unburned, unbroken. The wanderer sat against the doorway, long legs folded beneath the robe, head bowed so the wide brim shadowed everything but trembling hands resting empty in the lap. Strength had poured out with every splash, regenerations over the child's hair, swiftness across the platform planks, healing mist that drifted even to the retreating pillager's boots. The creature had given until nothing remained inside but quiet ache and the faint echo of giving. Beside the wanderer, the child knelt now, small knees pressed to warm wood, small hands hovering uncertain near the pale, scarred ones. No fear in those eyes, only something deeper, something that looked like home. "You're hurt," the child whispered. The creature lifted its head slowly. Green eyes met brown ones, soft, steady, unafraid. For the first time, the pointed hat did not hide the face completely. Moonlight and dawn met halfway across pale skin, across the long nose, across the faint glow that lightning had left behind forever. "I am tired," the wanderer answered, voice low, honest. "But the hut still stands. You still breathe?" The child reached out, hesitant at first, then bolder. Small fingers closed around one cold hand, held it. Warmth seeped slowly through skin that had forgotten how to feel anything but cold. "I'm taking you home," the child said. Not a question, a promise. The wanderer looked toward the distant village lights, faint pinpricks now softening in morning mist. Torchlight no longer, only lanterns left burning for someone lost and found. The old fear rose one last time, small, familiar, whispering of slammed doors and shouted words. But the child's hand stayed, and the flower crown, petals long wilted yet still carried inside the hut, floated in its bowl like a memory that refused to fade. The wanderer rose slowly, legs unsteady, robe trailing ash and dew. The child stood too, small but sure, slipped one arm around the tall shadow's waist, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Together, they stepped down the rickety ladder, one careful rung at a time. Boots and bare feet left prints side by side in softening mud. The swamp watched, quiet, approving, willows dipping lower as if in farewell, frogs singing a slow, sleepy blessing. The path wound outward, through reeds that parted gently, past sunken boats, no longer worth looting, toward fields where wheat stood golden in first light. No torches waited, no pitchforks, only open doors in the distance, voices calling a child's name with relief instead of rage. Halfway there, the wanderer paused, looked back once, at the crooked hut still standing on its stilts, at the cauldron's dying embers visible through the open door, at the life built in loneliness now left behind. The child tugged gently forward. "It's okay," the small voice said. "You don't have to stay out there anymore. You can come where the light is." The creature exhaled, a long, trembling breath that carried years of fog and silence, then took one more step, and another, until the village edge rose soft before them, roofs thatched in gold, smoke curling from chimneys like quiet prayers. A few faces appeared at windows, eyes widened, whispers began, but no one reached for torches, no one shouted, only watched, curious, uncertain, yet still, as a small child led a tall, shadowed figure forward by the hand. The wanderer felt the old wound throb one final time, then soften, not healed completely, perhaps never completely, but touched by something warmer than any potion. Forgiveness offered without being asked, belonging chosen without being earned. At the first open door, the child stopped, turned, looked up with eyes bright as dawn. "You saved me," the child said simply. The wanderer knelt, robe pooling around them both like spilled night. Long fingers brushed a stray lock from the small forehead. "And you saved me," the creature answered, voice breaking soft on the words. "By coming back, by staying, by seeing what no one else would." The child smiled, gap-toothed, radiant, then stepped forward and wrapped thin arms around the wanderer's neck in the gentlest hug the world had ever known. No explosion followed, no lightning answered, only warmth, only quiet, only home, and somewhere in the deepest part of the heart, where scars had grown thick and silent for so long, a small green light flickered, not from storm, not from potion, but from something simpler, something truer, acceptance. not because the face had changed, not because the world had forgiven everything, but because one small soul had chosen to love the shadow anyway. And in that choice, everything began to mend